Bonjour, I'm Cécile Lenné,
And I'm Annie Ewing.
and we are word language teachers, as well as comprehensible input-based methodology trainers. But really today it doesn't matter because we are here to talk about copy editing and proofreading. I have been a copy editor, proofreader for French CI novels for roughly 4 years. And I started with Fluency Matters as a proofreader. And over the past few years, I have worked with a lot of different publishers and independent authors. And I am also myself now an author of 3 comprehensible input novels, 3 language readers in French and 1 in Spanish.
Which I have copy edited.
Which Annie has copy edited and have learned so much from you. And I'm so glad you're here today.
I am glad to be here and glad to work with you. So I'm a copy editor and proofreader of comprehensible readers and teacher's guides in French and Spanish and also English. And I think I've done 1 Italian book. And I've also translated a couple of comprehensible readers from Spanish into French. So between us,
yeah,
I calculate, and I'm not sure of the numbers, but I think between us we have copy edited, translated, or proofread almost 100 comprehensible readers.
That sounds about right. So we have a little experience to share with you, and today we wanted to really cover what it is that we actually do. What does Annie do, and what do I do when we receive a manuscript? So let's get started.
All right. What do we do? Sorry. So in theory, I'm going to talk about the definitions of copy editor and proofreader. In theory, the copy editor works on a manuscript that's gone through at least 1 or 2 peer reviews. In our world, that's a trusted reader or a beta reader or at some stage a native speaker reader of the manuscript. And then when it comes to us, we're going to check on the language. Is it correct? Is it punctuated properly? Is it appropriate? And the formatting, just basic formatting, whether their paragraphs are set up right, line spacing, basic readability issues. Then we're going to look at the wording, and we may suggest changes to the wording. And finally, we're going to check the facts and the story. And we may suggest changes to the story as well at the level that we're working on as a copy editor. Fast forward. Remember, that was working on a manuscript. Fast forward to where the author is almost ready to print. At this point, they need a proofreader. They need somebody who works on a formatted facsimile of the final product. In the old days, we used to call this camera-ready copy. And at that stage, a proofreader does a final check for language issues. Remember, it's already been through native readers and a copy editor and a bunch of other readers. So now we're just looking at final check for language issues. We're looking at formatting. And in this stage of formatting, we're really looking at how the text is on the page, whether the page numbers are in the right place, the headers, the footers. There's a lot more detail in the formatting that we do at the proofreading stage. And then maybe possibly at this point, we may also suggest minor changes to the story that might have come up in a final round of revisions.
Yes, and actually, you are the one who taught me about those 2 separate roles. And I think that when I started with my very first proofreader job, which was with Fluency Matters, I was truly a proofreader. But my role has evolved over the past few years as I've been working with many different authors. And I thought I was still a proofreader. And I remember the conversation with you when you were like, no, I think you're doing more than proofreading, Cécile. Tell me what you're doing. And I'm starting to tell you, well, I make recommendations about the story and and you're like, no, You should not be doing that. So I really appreciate that you have clarified for us the difference between a copy editor and a proofreader. Now, in practice,
yes, well, in practice.
yeah, let's take a look. In practice, there are we think there are three factors. So wait, three French, and now I have to do the three American. There it is. Really hard for me to do. But there are three factors that will really dictate what you should do when you get a manuscript from a publisher or an author. There are three major things you need to consider before taking on the work. So here we go. The first thing you need to do is identify who is asking. Whose manuscript is this? So this could be a publisher, as we talked about. And by publishers, we mean, and please chime in, Annie, Fluency Matters, TPRS Books,
Command Performance Language Institute, Arcos in the Netherlands, Teachers Discovery.
I would even put Senior Woolley as
yeah.
Even if he is an independent, he's got an actual project manager. He works with a professional illustrator. I mean, he has a team in place, and it's a very professional business. So I would put him as well as a publishing house. And typically, when a publishing house comes to you, they are very clear about what they want and what they need on the script. The second type of author that can come to you is an experienced independent author. So someone who has self-published many books, either with a publisher, even in the past, and now as an independent author, or just as an independent author. And then the third author, I would say, and the one where the work will be the most involved are the brand new independent authors. And I'm really excited to see that we have so many new independent authors coming up now in our field, right?
Yeah.
And right. I do feel that, we have, as proofreaders and copy editors, we have the opportunity and even the responsibility to help bring those manuscripts to the next level. So it's a really exciting line of work. And of course, exactly, another caveat to who they are officially is what is their level of experience with using and writing comprehensible texts, because that is going also to influence the amount of work that we will do with them to help make the text as comprehensible as possible.
Yep. So that's thing one,
first, right?
That's thing one.
Yeah.
Factor one. Factor two.
Yeah, that's a big one. What does the author or publisher say they want? And I alluded to that a little bit earlier by saying typically a publisher will be very clear on what they want, and you will know they are ready to publish, and now they just need your eye on the final copy of the manuscript. But these are, personally, Annie, and you tell me if you've heard those questions before, but these are the questions that I've heard from an author. Hey, Cécile, can you tell me what you think? Can you take a look? Can you give me an estimate? Can you edit it? I've never had anyone say, can you copy edit it? Even if I ended up being a copy editor. So there is a lot of education that we need to do, Annie. But yeah. Can you edit it? I've had that question. Or can you proofread it? Have you had those two?
I think the ones that I've seen the most are, can you proofread it? Which is sort of a catch-all for everything.
It's a catch-all phrase.
Yeah.
You've known that, can you take a look?
Can you take a look? And I've had, can you give me an estimate? Which is really hard to do.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
So that's the variety of entry points that you're going to get into a manuscript. And our biggest advice here is to stop and move on to the third factor.
All right. So this is where you step in your professional capacity. Mm-hmm. And you have some questions for the author or the publisher. And when I'm working with a new author or an author who's new to me, I actually have a document I've created with 20 steps to publishing a comprehensible reader. And it starts after you've written the reader, and it ends just before you press the publish button. And so I typically send this document to new authors or authors who are new to me, just to give them a sense of the process, because there are a lot of things that need to happen. And so some of these questions that you might ask your author is, has your manuscript been spell and grammar checked?
That's not the first question I ask, but I love that one.
No, it seems like a no-brainer.
It does, doesn't it?
It does. And yet I think a lot of people say, I'm not sure how to do that in Spanish on my computer because it's set for English. And so that's a no-brainer. That's an easy fix. Who else has read it? This is a big question.
Big one.
Go back to the copy editor sees a manuscript that has been reviewed by at least one or two peer readers. We want to know who has seen it. Has it been seen by a native speaker? If it's not written by a native speaker, how many people have looked at it? And what type of people have looked at it?
Yeah. And
then it's important to know who the author's audience is, what level, what sort of readers are they thinking about in writing it? Because that helps us help them get it right.
Yes, this is a question that I ask every time, because it's going to drive the amount of simplification suggestions that I make, the language suggestions that I make. I mean,
yeah,
drive a lot of things. So even if the author doesn't quite know, just give us an idea. Is this more novice kind of manuscript or more an intermediate kind of manuscript?
And then sort of following that is, have you done a word count? Have you done, so a word count, how many words are there in your story? And then have you run it through a word count app that tells you how many unique words are in your story? And that helps support the leveling of the reader.
Yeah.
These are sort of subcontracting type things. What is the status of illustrations? Are you having them? Are they in the works? Have you thought about them? Have you created a glossary? Is your book, has it been designed and formatted? What are the other things that you might have thought about or might not have at this point? We just want to know where you are. We're not prescribing that this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the formatting was the last one. So what formatting has been done? Have you made it readable? Or have you actually made it look like a publishable book? Where in that range does your manuscript fall?
Yeah, those are really important questions. I think, and a very important piece of advice, Annie, especially when you're new in copy editing and proofreading, because somebody sends you a manuscript and you're like, yes, I'll take it. And then you open and you're like, oh, close the manuscript and go back and ask questions.
Right.
So that's why we're trying to help our newbies, people who are interested in this field to really pause for a second before taking on the work and really think about where the manuscript is at.
Right. And what stage you want to accept it at. I think that's important too.
Right, because you and I have exchanged, about this, and sometimes I tend to take a manuscript a little too early. And so you have helped me sort of rein in, say, let the author develop it a little further. And that was very good advice. So moving on, now that we have those three components or those three factors. So one, who is asking? Two, what do they say they're asking for? Stop. And three, ask those questions, really get a good understanding for where the manuscript is at. Now we're going to look at what the work is about. And we're going to give you an overview, obviously. We're not going to go into detail of it, but there are 5 different categories of work: language, formatting, simplification, fact-checking, and story checking. And instead of telling you what goes underneath each of those, especially since we have we have two jobs, we have the copy editor and we have the proofreader, and each of them do something in all of those categories, but at a very different involvement level. We wanted to show you some excerpts of manuscripts and sort of talk through what we see at first glance in each of those categories, so you get really something concrete. Shall we try that, Annie?
I'm ready.
I'm ready too.
All right, here we go. Okay, so here we have something that might be considered an early manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you think why this would be considered an early manuscript?
Oh yeah. I can think why it's an early manuscript. I mean, this is a manuscript that I received, and the formatting is really what, let's say the lack of formatting in a way that's legible is what makes it very early.
Right.
So what do you, yeah.
So, and for this screen, we're just gonna highlight formatting.
Yes.
And because really you need to think about this as a copy editor, and we encourage authors to think about this. The writer has just been getting their story out on the page, and all they've been thinking about is what they're going to say and getting it out there. And yet, a good time to think about just some basic formatting is this point between when you've vomited your thoughts onto the page and when you share it with somebody else, whether it's a trusted reader or a native reader. In many cases, the first read, the first time they ask someone else to read this, it might be a favor. They're asking a colleague or a family member to read their manuscript and tell them what they think about it. And so if you're asking somebody a favor, you want to make it as easy for them as you can. Exactly. So you want to make it easy to read, pleasant to read. You want to think about how it looks and how it's going to be the most welcoming text for them to look at. So think about spacing on the page, the size of the font, the particular font you use, putting spaces between paragraphs, maybe making it clearer where the paragraphs are by indenting or something.
Having page breaks between chapters.
Page breaks between chapters, yeah, just so it's basic things to help guide these generous volunteer readers to the story rather than focusing on the text. And at that point, it's, well, we'll show you what it might look like after just some, what you call it, light formatting. I like that idea, just light formatting.
Before you show that, so Annie, when you get this kind of early manuscript, what do you do?
I would say, I would ask, has anybody else looked at this? Who's looked at it?
Right.
And I would say it really would be helpful if this had some more formatting to it.
Yeah.
And I think you and I both agree that sometimes writers don't know what we mean by that.
Right. And so I know that sometimes what I do when I get, and I don't get them very often, but when I do, I do the light formatting for the first chapter, just to show them how much more legible it's going to be for anyone who puts their eyes on the manuscript, and how much more valuable the feedback is going to be.
Yeah.
And then I let them format everything else.
Nice. And I even often, I will teach them how to do some of the formatting, do a little.
For the newer authors.
Tutorial. It's more word processing that some people need, just some guidance in that. And I'm happy to do that because it makes the text so much easier to read down the road.
So let's take a look at what happens when we can finally start our work as copy editors and proofreaders once the manuscript has been lightly formatted, like right here. So now we can begin focusing on language. And this manuscript has been written by a native speaker. So obviously the language is very solid. So, but I do see a couple of opportunities just at a glance, for example, with the point de suspension. Can you help me, Ali, with that phrase?
Dot, 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 or...
The ellipsis, is that? Yes, so I can see that there is in that third paragraph a lot of ellipsis, and it's not been used completely according to convention, so that could be something that I would look into for language.
And formatting. Yeah.
And formatting too. I mean, yes, it's kind of together.
Yeah.
In terms of the simplification portion, because this author is a native speaker, I see a couple of idiomatic expressions, such as in the second paragraph, Médor aboie en signe de joie. So en signe de joie is an idiomatic expression. And he has a couple of those. That's one that jumps at me because it's in the second paragraph.
Oh, down here.
Yes, il se ressaisit. Like he grabs himself, but I don't know how you say that in English. Like he gets a hold of himself.
Yes.
So those are pretty specific idiomatic expressions. So in terms of simplification, I might recommend, you know, did you purposely put this here? Is this something that you're going to reuse a lot in the manuscript? And if you're not planning on reusing, is there a better way, if not better, sorry, but simpler way of saying that? Or can we live without it? So those are some ideas around simplification. For fact-checking, since the story takes place in Africa, and it is a fictional story, but it's still anchored in real places and people who live in those various places, there's going to be a lot of fact-checking to do for this manuscript.
So when I was reading it, even on this page that doesn't really mention
a lot of
places, I was thinking, I know that it takes place in Senegal, and I can't remember if we know that in the first chapter. But I was reading in the third paragraph when Camara is packing, and then he gets dressed and he puts on a red pullover, a jean, and a hoodie. And so just out of curiosity, I went online and looked for pictures of teenagers in Senegal to see what they wear.
Exactly.
I was kind of expecting that they wouldn't wear quite that much clothing in a climate that's usually, the temperature is usually in the 80s. So that's something I would question. It's not something I would mark as wrong, but I would just say, is this appropriate clothing for this culture?
Yes, and another one that jumps at me now that I actually did, but is the name Camara. When you said Camara, it hit me. So Camara is mostly a family name. I could not, when I looked up Senegalese first names, I did not find Camara as, let's say, in the top 20. That doesn't mean it's never used, but it's just something that I would fact check is the names of the protagonists to make sure that it indeed match the country where this is taking place in.
How about story checking?
On this particular one, I don't have a lot of, in this particular excerpt, I don't have a lot of story checking yet. But in the next one that we're going to look at, we're going to have some examples of story checking.
Okay.
So if we move on to the second manuscript that we have for you, that is also ready for copy editing. It's a completely different manuscript, completely different author, and we're going to go through the same process. So under language, and what do you see? What do you feel would be appropriate?
Well, I know this author. I happen to know that this author is not a native speaker, so I'm going to read it with a different confidence. Usually when I read a native speaker's writing, I assume that they're right. And this, when I'm reading—
Thank you.
When I'm reading a non-native speaker, I am, even though, for example, this author I know has manuscripts looked at by native speakers before they come to me for copy editing.
Yes.
You still have the flavor of the language that is not as native as what we saw in the previous one. For example, in this this paragraph, I remember reading this line, "Elle n'est ni grande ni petite," talking about the house. It's neither large nor small. To me, what I'm expecting is that it's something in between.
Exactly.
But in fact, what comes next is it's enormous. And I thought that might be confusing for readers. There's nothing ungrammatical about it, but it's not, it sets up a false expectation.
An expectation, yes. Absolutely agree. That's a really good example under language. And what about formatting?
So for formatting, you can tell that the author has, got space between the paragraphs. Yes. and everything's looking very easy to read on the page. But I would focus in on the dialogue.
Yes, that's where my eyes went to.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you notice about the dialogue?
So first of all, I know what I recommend to my authors is when you opening a dialogue where many people are going to exchange, you need to introduce that there's a dialogue. So here she does not really introduce the dialogue. La voiture s'arrête devant la maison, and then suddenly there's a dialogue, and it's not clear why the dialogue is even happening. So formatting wise, just even adding a colon, that's not enough for this, but since we are under formatting, formatting wise, just opening a colon gives the reader an indication something is going to happen. A dialogue is about to start.
Yeah.
Of course, also the dashes, is that what you call them? The tirets?
Yeah.
The dashes are not following the French convention for dialogues. We use the tiret quadratin, which you're going to have to help me again in English.
I think it's an M dash or an N dash.
N dash.
We refer to the width of it. So if it's as wide as an N, it's slightly longer than this one. If it's as wide as an M, it's even longer.
Yes. So those are the two main things that jumped at me with the paragraph, is that it's not introduced as a paragraph, and then the N dashes are not there.
That as a dialogue, right?
Dialogue.
And that actually comes up for me with simplification as well. One of the things that I've heard as feedback from readers of lower level novels, or teachers of readers of lower level novels, is that they're very easily confused by dialogue where it's not 100% clear who's talking. So one of the things that a writer can do is say up here, Cheryl asks, Maman, blah, blah, blah. And then, yes, that's blah, 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 said Maman, just to kind of line up the dialogue. So that linguistically as well.
Yes, that's a great simplification. I like that on this dialogue, we had both formatting and simplification comments. In terms of fact-checking, it's very different from the previous manuscript, because the previous manuscript happens in Africa and in several countries in Africa. So there's a lot of fact-checking. This manuscript is sort of, it's not needed for the story to know where it is. There's very few landmarks or anything that tells us that we know it's in France because there's an address, right? And it's rue. So we know it's in a francophone, sorry, not France, in a francophone country, because it's the rue number and rue, but that's pretty much all we have. So the fact-checking is going to look different, right, Annie?
Yes. Yeah, and for the fact-checking, I would look more at as almost bleeds into story checking, as whether, when Cheryl climbs the stairs, she turns right to go to her bedroom in one chapter and turns left to go to her bedroom in another chapter. That's checking the continuity of the story as well. I don't remember in this story if there were particular things. I don't think there were facts per se that.
Yeah, So from one manuscript to the next, the amount of work you do in one of those 5 categories is going to look drastically different. And I think that's why we chose those 2 different manuscripts. In terms of story checking, I know one thing that I caught with this particular manuscript is that Cheryl is with her mother. Her mother is a single mom, and they move into this enormous house. I mean, you see it in the first paragraph. It's enormous. It's got columns outside, and there's this giant stairs with statues. So in your mind, you're creating this picture of like this old manor, right? But it's just the 2 of them, and I guess it's never really explained in the story why are they even moving in something that gigantic. And so I asked the author, as part of my story checking, without giving the whole backstory, can you just clarify why they move into such a big house? Is it an inheritance? What is the reason? Why are they moving into this really big house instead of an apartment, or a smaller house?
And I actually saw this manuscript several phases later, when it was
later, yeah,
more as a proofreading job, when it was formatted for publishing. And I didn't have that question because the author had figured out a pretext for, that the house was particularly cheap and it was ready right away. And the mom and the daughter, they basically had their life in their car and they needed a place right away. So
exactly. And so that's the kind of added value that a copy editor can provide. And that's why you helped me see the difference again between the copy editor and the proofreader. And that really played out in this manuscript.
Yeah.
I think we're ready for the last kind of manuscript.
The last one. This is a manuscript that is designed and it's formatted and it's ready for proofreading because it's in what would be considered a publishing form, camera-ready copy. And so for proofreading, I would say that the focus is going to be on a little bit on language and a lot on formatting, and much less on the other 3, but we'll talk about those. So this one, which I happen to know is written by a native speaker, who is a very skilled writer and knows her writing strategies and style very well.
Annie, you're going off script on this one. You're making me blush.
Anyway, this particular writer, I'm not too worried about the language. However, it's interesting to note that that when a writer is going from draft to comments to draft to comments to draft, sometimes they might make a change that actually causes something to happen in the language that that even a non-native speaker could catch.
Yes.
For example, on this one, in this sentence, the writer, I think, was simplifying, and so she originally had I think, je range mon portable et mes écouteurs.
That is correct. I remember this.
and rather than using ranger, which is a great word, but it's not as high frequency, she changed it to je mets. But when she put mets, she had to find some place to put things. She couldn't, ranger is just put away and mets is put. So that sentence is incomplete there. So I'm
so glad you cut that. Definitely. I do want to reinforce the point that you made. Just because it's a native speaker who is writing doesn't mean that the language is going to be perfect, ever. So.
And that wasn't a language error so much as an editing error or a...
Sure, but in the end, it turns into a language problem. So I'm so glad you caught it. Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that happens at this point, the copy editor may not have seen all of the footnotes in place. And so the proofreader is the last one who gets to see whether the words in the text are properly footnoted, and whether the footnotes are accurate to what's in the text, and whether the English is spelled correctly. So I not don't.
Even the formatting of the footnotes.
And the formatting, definitely.
Gosh, that's so annoying, but it's sometimes the font is different from one footnote to the next. And
yes, and the size of the dash and little things like
really
that.
Nitty gritty stuff at this point.
This is really nitty gritty.
Yes.
And this is where I think why I think 90% of proofreading is in the formatting. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. For example, one of the things that I noticed in the formatting here is that, sorry, that black bar is there. This is chapter 1, and it starts on page 2 on the left-hand side. And typically, chapter 1 starts on a right-hand page, and it may have something facing it, but it usually starts on the right-hand page, and a right-hand page is always an odd number. So somewhere in there here, the writer needs to either insert a blank page or rearrange things so that chapter 1 is on the right-hand side. And it's just, it's convention, and it may also be that this particular author wants to do things differently, but it's my job as a proofreader to say, this is unusual, is this what you intended?
Or maybe she looked up the page numbering.
And then I pointed this out the other day, and Cecile hadn't noticed it or wasn't aware of it, that she chooses, this author chooses to use only left justification so that the margin is straight on the left side, and then the right side just flows naturally. Whatever the length of the words are that fit on the line, that's her choice.
Yes.
And I actually like that. I think I like the look of it. I like the fact that the lines don't get stretched or shrunk, that words don't have to be hyphenated. I think
fake spaces, the stretching, I really don't like it. I didn't even realize I was doing that.
No, and again, it's a choice. And when I was in grad school, we used to say that people in the sciences always had the margins justified on both sides, and people in the humanities always had the right.
There you go.
I believe. All right. So in the simplification, do you remember, I know you worked really hard at simplification because that's what you do.
Yes, I did. But for example, I mean, range, like your example of range, that came up when I did my word count, and I saw that I had used range, I can't remember, but not very many times. It might have been just the one time or maybe twice. And so that's why I decided to change it to mais. But that's something that the author should really own, but the copy editor could really help with. But at this stage, in terms of proofreading, I doubt that there would be much simplification you would find if all the iterations have happened, right?
Right.
I doubt you would find something.
Right. And that's a really important point to make, that an author can format a manuscript to look like this, having not gone through the earlier stages of having other readers look at it and having a copy editor. And you cannot call that proofreading, even though it looks nice on the page. Yes. You can't call it proofreading if it hasn't had those other eyes on it before this.
I have a question. What is this I'm and your at the bottom?
I forgot that.
I wanted to mention that.
I did. That goes back under formatting.
I see.
And it's something that I just noticed.
That you told me and I didn't do.
Looked at this. What?
Something that you told me and I didn't do it.
Okay. So again, it's not an easy fix. It's not difficult, but for some reason, I don't know why, sometimes the apostrophe comes up as a straight apostrophe, and sometimes it comes up as a curly apostrophe.
And I have no idea why, but that's another formatting point that the proofreader, the eagle eye, would identify. Mm-hmm.
And some authors don't bother to fix it, and some do.
Exactly. What about fact checking and story checking, Annie?
So for fact checking on this, the one thing that I found as a proofreader was that at the proofreading phase, the author had added a an appendix that had some cultural information for each chapter, or where it seemed necessary for each chapter. And that was new. I hadn't seen that before. So that required me to both check the information in the appendix against the information in the story. I also looked things up because I wanted to see how often it had to do with proper names. I wanted to see how they were spelled and how they were written in other contexts in French.
Yes.
So on this, on the right-hand page here, there is the reference to Le Rocher de la Garde.
Yes.
And I never know in French whether you capitalize the le, whether you capitalize the rocher, whether you capitalize the la. And so I wanted to check.
And was it okay?
It was okay. Honestly, I found it in every possible combination.
Yes, but
so,
Lagarde, I must add, is where I grew up. So I know it's a capitalized L and capitalized G. But you're so right that especially acronyms, when you spell out the acronyms in French, in English you would probably capitalize everything. In French you would capitalize the first one and then leave the other ones not capitalized. And those are some great fact-checking tips, definitely, for French manuscripts. And what about story checking? I do remember something you said about this chapter.
Actually, I had forgotten that, but I noticed it here because this was the version that was sent to me for proofreading. And you don't notice it just reading these 2 pages, but you see at the beginning, the main character is singing, and she's singing something in English, and she talks about how she's doing choreography to this song. And then in the second chapter, she talks about that choreography that they're doing to Careless Whisper. And to me, I said, oh, I didn't realize they were doing a choreography to Careless Whisper, because I don't know what Careless Whisper is, and I had no idea what this song was.
Exactly.
So I looked them up and I realized, okay.
It's the same, and you gave me that feedback, which was awesome. So I could add in the first chapter that the song was Careless Whisper. Yes.
And that
great add.
It didn't feel out of place. It didn't feel, it felt perfectly natural to do that. And then it made the second reference easier.
Exactly. Very good.
Thanks.
So I think here we have it. We have reviewed 3 different manuscripts, and hopefully we've given you concrete ideas of what the work looks like for each of the 5 categories: language, formatting, simplification, fact-checking, and story checking. So with this overview, we're going to now close it and wrap it up. If you have any questions about the job of a copy editor or a proofreader, feel free to reach out to any of us. We love talking about this endeavor, and we are nerds of copy editing and proofreading, and we strive to provide quality manuscripts. So thank you so much for being with us. And Annie, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a great collaboration.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. À la prochaine.
À la prochaine.